When Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett calmly brought up Melania Trump's immigration history during a tense Capitol Hill hearing, it wasn't just a bold political moment. It was a mirror held up to the American conscience. It wasn't loud or grandstanding. It was a moment so sharp and deliberate, it sliced through the noise like a scalpel. But before we dive into this story, I want to hear from you. Comment down below, where in the world are you watching from? Let's light up this comment section. And hey, if you love stories with high drama, power shifts, and the kind of moments that leave people speechless, you're in the right place. Tap that subscribe button right now. Hit the notification bell so you never miss when we drop the next chapter in these powerful, untold stories. The hearing had been going on for over an hour. Lawmakers hurled accusations back and forth. The usual political theater was in full swing. Cameras panned. Microphones captured every raised voice. But through all that noise sat Jasmine Crockett, calm, steady, flipping through papers as if the chaos around her didn't touch her. But it did. You could see it in the hesitation of her hand, the way her eyes lingered on one of the panelists across from her. "You question my loyalty to this country?" she asked, not with outrage, but with steel. Her voice didn't rise, her body didn't shift. She just looked straight ahead and delivered the blow. "Then maybe we should talk about Melania's visa history, too." And then everything stopped. Not figuratively, actually. The hearing room froze. The GOP lawmaker who'd been tossing veiled shots about real Americans looked stunned, as if the air had been knocked out of him. Even a few Democrats seemed caught off guard. But Jasmine didn't smirk or flinch. Her expression was unwavering, as if she'd been holding that line in her pocket for years, waiting for the moment it would cut deepest. 10 seconds. That's all it took. A clipped video segment, just 10 seconds long, ripped from a 2-hour session. And it spread like wildfire across the internet. By the time the hearing ended, Jasmine said it and Melania green card were trending, blazing across Twitter faster than pundits could type. But what most people missed was the nuance. Jasmine never said Melania should be deported. She didn't advocate for removal or retribution. Her words were strategic, intentional. She was pointing out a reality familiar to millions, especially Black and brown immigrant families who have been scrutinized, interrogated, and questioned endlessly. For them, every job, every apartment, every government form came with loaded questions. Do you love this country? Are you loyal? And here was Jasmine, turning that same mirror back. It was never about Melania. It was about the hypocrisy, the double standards, the line drawn again and again between us and them. But backlash doesn't wait. By nightfall, conservative radio was shouting headlines like, "Democrat attacks First Lady's immigration," and "Did Crockett just suggest deporting Melania Trump?" The media storm distorted her words before the truth could breathe. Yet the full clip told a different story. And that's what made it more powerful. People weren't just reacting to Jasmine, they were reacting to what she uncovered. By morning, Jasmine's phone was buzzing nonstop. 3 major interview requests were already sitting in her inbox: CBS, MSNBC, and a morning show with national reach. Her staff looked tired, pacing the room, trying to get ahead of the spin. "Do we stay quiet?" one aide asked. Jasmine shook her head. "No," she said calmly. "We speak, but not the way they want us to." The media was catching up fast, but Jasmine was already 2 steps ahead. While everyone scrambled to make sense of her words, she was rooted in something much deeper, years of living with the reality she had just exposed. Long before Congress, Jasmine Crockett had been a public defender in Dallas. No cameras, no trending hashtags, just stories. Women trying to keep their kids. Teenagers arrested for traffic stops that never should have happened. Men labeled dangerous because of where they were born or how they looked, not because of what they'd done. One case stuck with her. A 19-year-old boy arrested for possession after a random stop. He had no record, no weapon, nothing violent, but the prosecution wouldn't budge. In court, Jasmine stood up and said, "You're building cages around this boy's life for something you wouldn't even book your nephew for." That moment didn't win the case, but it won the room. And it earned the boy probation instead of prison. That fire, that precision, never left her. She carried it into the Texas House, then to Capitol Hill. But Congress played a different game. There, people learned to smile through lies, to swallow truth in favor of civility. Jasmine wasn't built for that. She never liked playing dumb, and she refused to stay silent. So when a smug former prosecutor from Florida sat across from her talking about foundational loyalty and American values, she didn't get emotional. She got exact. She was tired of the recycled narrative. First they question your name, then your motives, then your right to belong, and when you finally respond with receipts, they act surprised that you dared to speak. It wasn't just tiring, it was dangerous. That's why her line about Melania's visa wasn't random. It was loaded with meaning. It came from years of watching double standards thrive. The modeling visas, the questions about timelines, the rumors of paperwork that never added up. None of it had ever really mattered, because Melania married the right man, spoke with the right accent, wore the right heels. And Jasmine? She simply had the audacity to ask a question, not to smear, not to tear down, but to challenge a truth too many were afraid to face. That's why the pushback was immediate, why headlines twisted her words before the sentence was even done. But Jasmine didn't blink, because this wasn't improvisation. It was a lifetime in the making. Outside the hearing room, another storm was forming, and this one had Trump's name all over it. Just before 10 p.m., the first post hit Truth Social. All caps, all fury. Disgusting attack on Melania. Jasmine Crockett should be ashamed. Apologize to the First Lady. Then came another post. They hate America. They hate success. They hate beauty. They protect criminals and attack patriots. Crockett is a nobody chasing ratings. Like gasoline on dry brush, Trump's words lit a fire that had already started burning. His followers didn't need context. They had a headline. They didn't watch the clip. They didn't care what was said. They just needed someone to blame. Jasmine's name was now trending with words like traitor, radical, and un-American. Cable news jumped in next. 3 networks, each spinning their own take. Some played the clip, others didn't bother. A few ran only screenshots and carefully edited lines to make it sound like Crockett had stormed into the East Wing demanding Melania's deportation. Jasmine's phone lit up like a siren. Calls, texts, mentions, death threats, hate messages, and a few honest check-ins. Are you okay? But she wasn't shaken. She recognized Trump's game immediately. Spin outrage into distraction, throw red meat to the crowd, and never address the point. And the irony? Trump didn't even dispute her claims. He didn't correct the visa questions. He didn't clarify anything about Melania's record. He just lashed out, loud, defensive, emotional, and counted on the echo chamber to do the rest. Her chief of staff, Lane Robbins, was still at the office when the posts hit. He stared at the flood of headlines, muttering, "Here we go." Jasmine walked in, holding a mug of chamomile tea, her expression unreadable. "Melania's trending," she said, almost amused. "Under Einstein visa, I didn't even start that one." Lane cracked a weary smile. "You know they're going to try and bury you in this." "They've been trying," she said, sinking into a chair. "Now they've just got better lighting." But she didn't respond online. No tweets, no snappy comebacks. Instead, her team posted the full, uncut hearing video to her official YouTube page. No edits, no flashy intros. Just the raw footage, her tone, her words, her receipts. And people watched. Over 800,000 views in the first hour. They weren't just watching. They were analyzing, sharing, captioning it with lines like, "Watch the whole thing. She didn't lie." And as Trump kept posting, louder and more erratic by the hour, something began to shift. For once, people weren't taking the bait. They were asking questions instead. Questions that weren't easy to shake off. Questions that landed with weight. Why is a black congresswoman being labeled racist for pointing out a fact? Why isn't Melania's immigration story ever examined? Why do the rules only seem to apply to some of us? Even a few conservative commentators, ones known for towing the party line, started softening. Not publicly defending Crockett, but admitting, she didn't lie. Others added, she didn't insult anyone, she just asked a question. And that, more than anything else, made people nervous. Because it was easier to argue against outrage than against calm, quiet truth. While Twitter was still on fire, another narrative was starting to bubble. One you wouldn't find on the evening news. But it was there. Real. Growing. By the next morning, Crockett's clip had made its way into local newscasts far from D.C., places like Dayton, Fresno, and Tulsa. Reporters aired the footage and posed a simple, uncomfortable question to their audiences. Was she wrong? And that was the problem for critics. Jasmine hadn't made anything up. She hadn't screamed, she hadn't gone after Melania's character. She'd simply asked a question, one that couldn't be misquoted, one that millions of Americans understood in their bones. By 9 a.m., she was booked for 2 national interviews, MSNBC and CBS mornings. She chose CBS first. Her team met her at a modest studio near Connecticut Avenue. Hair, makeup, mic check. Lane sat scrolling through coverage on his phone, reading out headlines. Crockett's swipe at Melania stirs national debate. Jasmine nodded. Fair. Is this what decency looks like now? Lane continued. From the Sentinel, she said flatly. My personal favorite. Congresswoman weaponizes immigration in political ambush. Jasmine raised an eyebrow. Ambush? I asked a question. The kind they ask people like me every day. When the interview began, CBS anchor Elaine Truitt didn't waste time. Congresswoman, you've been accused of attacking the former First Lady. Do you believe your comments went too far? Jasmine leaned forward, her voice unwavering. I think it's fascinating how asking a question about fairness becomes an attack. What I said wasn't extreme. What's extreme is how upset people get when the truth touches their comfort zone. Truitt tilted her head. So this wasn't personal? Jasmine shook her head. I don't know Melania Trump. I don't wish her harm. But if we're going to pretend this country treats everyone equally, we have to confront the facts. Some folks make mistakes and get second chances. Others make the same mistakes and end up in court or deported. That's not gossip. That's reality. That 40-second clip from CBS was reposted over 4 million times within hours. Meanwhile, the noise on cable news kept humming, but it wasn't sticking the way it used to. People were watching Jasmine speak, watching how she held herself, and realizing something the headlines were too afraid to admit. She wasn't wrong. At the same time, something powerful was happening online, something no news chyron could fully capture. Young immigrants, many of them first-generation Americans, started posting under a new hashtag, I am Jasmine. One after another, they shared their stories. Stories of being stopped, questioned, doubted, of seeing their parents jump through impossible legal hoops just to stay. My mom was almost deported over a typo in her paperwork, one wrote. But Melania, she got to renew her modeling visa how many times? It wasn't rage that filled the timeline, it was recognition. Jasmine had said what millions were too exhausted or afraid to say. Still, the backlash hadn't gone away. Her office had to shut down the public email after thousands of hate messages came flooding in. Some were just angry. Others were graphic, violent. One read, "Keep your mouth shut or we'll do it for you." Lane flagged that one for the FBI. Jasmine didn't retreat. She didn't lash out. She didn't fold. Later that same day, she sat down with a college reporter from Ann Arbor. "Did you ever think about apologizing?" the young journalist asked. Jasmine paused, tilted her head, and answered evenly. Apologize for what? For telling the truth? For asking the kind of question that gets thrown at people like me every day? No, I don't regret that. I wish more people had the courage to do it. That's what made her so dangerous, to some. She didn't scream, she didn't crumble, she just kept showing up, calm, clear. She wasn't trying to win arguments, she was changing the conversation. And while the internet was caught in a tug-of-war between outrage and admiration, something else was brewing. Something far from cable studios and Twitter threads. In Mesa, Arizona, a protest had already been planned for that weekend, originally focused on the quiet rise in deportations of undocumented workers. But once the Crockett clip went viral, the organizers updated their signs. Her name was now everywhere. Ana Ruiz, 27, born in Flagstaff to Mexican immigrants, stood on the courthouse steps holding a cardboard sign. If she gets to stay, so should my dad. It wasn't polished, it wasn't slogan-tested, but it hit like a thunderclap. Over 500 people gathered, teachers, nurses, veterans, students, some held signs, others held photos, loved ones stuck in visa limbo. Their chant rose above the desert air, same rules, same rights, no more silence. And that's when everything changed, because now, this wasn't just about Jasmine Crockett or Melania Trump. It was about families, about fairness, about a country forced to look at itself in the mirror and not liking what it saw. The protest in Mesa made the evening news, not because of arrests or clashes, but because of how directly it connected the Crockett moment to everyday lives. Suddenly, this wasn't some beltway skirmish between parties. It was real. emotional, personal. Even in places you'd never expect, small towns in Louisiana, rural stretches of Nebraska, community halls in Tennessee, people were talking. In Shreveport, a high school civics teacher paused her class mid-lecture. She played the clip of Jasmine's hearing and asked the students, "Why does this make people so uncomfortable?" The silence said more than any answer could. In a college in Birmingham, the moment sparked a full debate. A law professor stopped her lecture and said, "Let's unpack this. Who gets to belong, and why?" Meanwhile, conservative media kept spinning. One popular radio host declared, "This is what happens when people who hate America get elected. They attack good women like Melania to push their bitter garbage." But it wasn't landing the way it used to. Even some of Trump's loyal listeners were mumbling, "She didn't lie, technically," or, "Yeah, but it's a fair question." Then, as if fate decided to fan the flames, a clip began circulating on Reddit. A 2001 interview Melania Trump did with a Slovenian TV outlet. In it, she vaguely mentioned working in the US before all her paperwork was finalized. It wasn't definitive, but it was enough to poke the bear. Now the conversation changed again. This wasn't about Crockett being out of line. Now, people were asking, "Wait, what are the facts here?" Fact checkers got involved. Immigration lawyers weighed in. Old documents were resurfaced, visa applications, work authorizations, timelines that never quite matched. All the things nobody cared about when Melania was just the model wife turned first lady. Suddenly, Jasmine Crockett's question wasn't provocative. It was inevitable. In Phoenix, Darnesha Fuller sat at her kitchen table, reading the news off her tablet. She turned to her husband and said, "She's not saying Melania should be deported. She's saying if they treat us like suspects, we get to ask questions too." Her husband nodded. "People don't like mirrors," he said, "especially when they don't recognize the face looking back." And as that mirror got held higher and clearer, Jasmine wasn't backing off. She was working. Behind the scenes, she'd begun drafting legislation, not a flashy headline grabber, just an amendment, one that would require full transparency from high-profile immigration applicants. No more sealed files, no more loopholes for the rich or politically connected. She didn't announce it. Not yet. Because Jasmine Crockett didn't move out of fear. She moved with purpose. While Jasmine quietly prepared her next steps, something unexpected arrived, a voice from her past, carrying something that would soon tip the scale. It started with a name on her calendar. Eli Kwan, a former immigration attorney. Years ago, they'd worked together at a legal clinic in Oak Park, back in Texas. She hadn't spoken to him since heading to Congress. Now he was here, listed for a private meeting. No subject, no agenda. He arrived at her office looking drained, carrying a manila folder and eyes that hadn't slept. "Are we secure?" he asked as he took a seat. Lane closed the door. Eli slid the folder across the desk. "This isn't public yet, but it will be. And when it is, it's going to flip this entire thing." Inside were scanned immigration documents, old ones, filing records, handwritten notes, application dates from Melania Trump's early visa years. One letter, in particular, stood out, a request for reconsideration citing freelance work done before she had legal work authorization. Jasmine read it twice, her eyes narrowing. "You verified this?" "Yes," Eli said, quietly. "I had to be sure. I've been sitting on this for weeks, but now it matters." Lane stared at the folder like it was ticking. "Why bring it to us?" Eli leaned back. "Because you didn't lie, and because you're the only one saying the quiet part out loud." Jasmine closed the folder carefully. No trembling hands, no grand reaction, just a quiet nod. "Okay," she said, "let's get ready." But while they prepared to drop a quiet bombshell, something else was stirring outside the political sphere. People. Not pundits, not politicians, just ordinary people, watching the headlines, watching Jasmine, and deciding they had something to say too. It began in El Paso. Marisol Jimenez, a third-grade teacher, posted a raw video to Instagram. No music, no filters, just her, standing in front of a whiteboard still marked with lesson notes. "I'm not here to talk about parties," she said. "But I've had to explain to 8-year-olds why their parents have to carry papers everywhere. And those same kids now see adults furious because someone asked how a white European woman got here. Think about that." The clip exploded. Over 3 million views by the weekend. Comments flooded in from teachers, parents, students, all echoing the same truth. The system doesn't treat everyone the same. In Minneapolis, an Army vet named Andre Colvin, Black 58, slow-spoken, posted a video from his backyard. He sat in a lawn chair, birds chirping, a glass of iced tea in hand. "I served this country," he said, "twice, and I still get asked where I'm really from. I don't know this congresswoman, but she said what I've been biting my tongue on for years. If that makes her un-American, what does that make me?" Then came the students. At a college in Sacramento, a group organized a quiet sit-in. No yelling, no chants. Just dozens of young people sitting shoulder to shoulder, holding signs, but not slogans, questions. Who gets to belong? Why do papers matter more for some? What if she was right? Photos of the protest hit Twitter, then TikTok, and by day's end, they were on the homepage of the New York Times. In Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, inside a local barbershop, a conversation sparked mid-haircut. A customer asked the barber, Harold Sims, if he'd heard about the Jasmine thing. "Harold?" An older man with salt and pepper hair and a steady hand paused mid-fade and said, "She didn't say anything I haven't said right here 100 times. Only difference is, she said it in front of a camera." The shop fell silent for a moment. Then someone mumbled, "Yeah, but she said it better." And that's what was resonating. People weren't rallying around Jasmine because she yelled. They were rallying because she didn't. In a world addicted to outrage, her calm, precise question hit harder than a speech. Quietly, her approval numbers began to climb. Independents, first- and second-generation immigrants, even moderate conservatives. Not all agreed with her politics, but they respected her delivery, her steadiness, her refusal to cave. A Sunday op-ed in a Toledo newspaper called her question the line that echoed across America. Written by a 60-year-old pastor, the piece read, "We can argue about tone. We can argue about timing, but we can't argue with the truth." The only reason that question shook people is because deep down, they already knew the answer. Meanwhile, Jasmine wasn't doing interviews or basking in the attention. She spent the week visiting schools, veterans' homes, and quietly sitting in on immigration hearings. No cameras allowed. She showed up. That was her statement. But beneath the public momentum, whispers were growing louder. Eli Kwan's folder was starting to circulate. Not through tabloids, but credible legal sources, trusted journalists. Slowly, methodically, the documents were verified and exposed. Reporters started asking questions that couldn't be brushed aside. If these records are real, why were they never addressed? Former Homeland Security officials declined comment. The Trump team issued a blanket statement calling it misinformation, but the documents didn't lie. Dates didn't line up. Statements contradicted filings. It wasn't quite a smoking gun, but it was smoke. Real, undeniable smoke. And once people see smoke, they start looking for fire. What no one expected was who would fan the flames next. A voice closer to Melania than anyone thought possible. She hadn't spoken publicly in 5 years, not since leaving the administration, not even to promote her book. But on a quiet Thursday morning, Sonia Lavelle, Melania Trump's former aide, broke her silence. She appeared unannounced on a political podcast called The Politic Room, hosted by former journalist Brian Voss. No teaser, no press. Just her voice, steady, deliberate. "I never thought I'd be doing this," Sonia began. "But after watching what happened to Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, staying silent started to feel like complicity." That opening line lit up newsrooms before the episode even finished. Sonia had been with Melania for years, handling schedules, managing logistics, coordinating media, never front and center. But she had seen everything. "There were always questions," she said, "about the visa timelines, the modeling jobs. I remember back in 2001, Melania got nervous after a magazine asked about work she did before her paperwork was done. She told me, 'I don't want people digging through my documents.' And I remember thinking, why would they?" Brian Voss leaned in. "Are you saying she admitted she worked without authorization?" Sonia paused. "I'm saying the timeline didn't make sense, and everyone around her knew that. We just didn't talk about it." That quote made it to headlines within the hour. By day's end, it was everywhere. CNN, USA Today, local stations in Tulsa, Reno, Jacksonville. And Jasmine, she said nothing. She didn't have to. The story had a heartbeat of its own now. Fact-checkers who had been cautious before now dug deeper. One report from the Austin Ledger revealed that Melania's H-1B visa carried specific work restrictions. Restrictions that, based on her modeling dates, may have been violated. Back when she was First Lady, the White House dismissed it as a clerical issue. But in this climate, that explanation didn't hold water. Because now, people weren't just listening to Jasmine's words, they were understanding her point. When she had asked the question, they'd called her divisive. But now that the answers were surfacing, those same critics weren't so sure. Even talk radio, once aggressive and hostile, began to shift. One host said cautiously, "I still think Crockett was confrontational, but maybe there's something here worth examining." It wasn't a reversal, but it was a crack, and cracks let in light. In Jacksonville, Kendra Blaine, a retired immigration officer, posted a video that cut through the noise. "I've processed over 8,000 immigration cases," she said directly to camera. "If any of my clients had Melania's inconsistencies, they would have been flagged immediately. We need to stop pretending this is normal." Her clip reached 2 million views in just 48 hours. And suddenly what had started as backlash became a reckoning. Jasmine Crockett's inbox began to change. The hate mail slowed, replaced by thank you notes, by personal stories, by quiet, heartfelt messages from people who felt, maybe for the first time, that someone in power had actually said what they couldn't. At her next press conference, Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't mention Sonia Lavelle or the leaked documents. She stood in front of a simple backdrop that read, "Same rules, same country." Then she said with no notes and no teleprompter, "I didn't come here to play games. I came here to represent the people who never get the benefit of the doubt." This was never about Melania. This was about principle. If one group has to follow the rules, then everyone should, period. No fireworks, no applause line, just truth. And it landed. Not because it was loud, but because it was clear. Later that week, Jasmine agreed to one final sit-down, her first long-form interview since the hearing that started it all. The show was Truth Seat, a Sunday primetime series known for its intensity and reach. She faced Maya Redding, a sharp, respected anchor who didn't do softballs. There was no script, no advisors nearby, just 2 chairs and millions watching. Maya opened direct. "Congresswoman Crockett, you've become the center of a national debate you didn't technically start. When you mentioned Melania Trump's visa history, did you expect this kind of reaction?" Jasmine blinked slowly, then answered with a faint smile. "I expected discomfort. I didn't expect distortion." Maya leaned in. "So what exactly were you trying to say?" Jasmine didn't hesitate. "I was talking about consistency. We live in a country where some people's legitimacy is always being questioned, based on name, accent, birthplace, and the people doing the questioning rarely face the same scrutiny." She let that settle, then added, "Melania Trump is just one example. She benefited from a process others would have been penalized for. That's not a character attack. That's a reality check." Maya countered, "But some say bringing up the former First Lady's immigration status was personal." "Then they're not listening," Jasmine said calmly. "I wasn't talking about her as a person. I was talking about the system she benefited from and the people it punishes. I've defended kids who got ice holds over paperwork typos. Meanwhile, the rich and powerful are treated like they're above the rules. Why?" There was a pause, the kind of silence that matters more than any applause. Maya asked one more. "You've gotten support from across the aisle, from young voters, from immigrants, even moderates. Why do you think your words hit the way they did?" Jasmine leaned forward. "Because people are tired of pretending they don't notice the double standard. And because I didn't flinch when the blowback came. I just told the truth." Backstage, Lane watched the interview from the green room. He wasn't focused on the questions. He was watching Jasmine's presence, the steadiness, the clarity, the way she didn't raise her voice but still made the room lean in. And outside the studio, people were already reacting. Clips from the interview spread like wildfire. One line in particular stuck. "If we are truly one country under the law, then we shouldn't need reminders that some people's paperwork gets handled more gently than others." That quote was printed on T-shirts by the end of the week. It showed up on protest signs in Milwaukee, bumper stickers in Fresno, even painted across a mural on the side of a community center in Albuquerque. But Jasmine didn't capitalize on it. She didn't post a victory thread or take a media tour. She left the studio quietly, her team in tow. On the sidewalk outside, a woman in her 50s approached. No camera, no entourage, just someone who had something to say. My brother got deported 5 years ago, the woman said. He filed late, one form, that's all it took. He's still in Honduras. And you said what I wish I could have said to someone's face. Jasmine held her gaze. She didn't give a speech. She just nodded. That was enough. But even with the firestorm behind her, Jasmine had one more stop, a high school gym in Baltimore. Not a press event, not a big fundraiser, just a folding chair crowd at Carver Vocational Technical High School. Students, teachers, a few local reporters. She looked out at rows of teens in hoodies, braids, sneakers, dyed hair. Not political analysts, not voters, yet, but they were listening, and she spoke to them like she always did, no fluff, no filters. You're going to hear a lot of things about who you are, she said, where you're from, what you deserve, and most of the time it won't come from truth, it'll come from fear. She paused, looked them in the eye. They'll try to keep you in a box, to make you stay quiet, because they're scared of what happens when you start asking real questions. Another pause. Then, plainly, asking questions isn't un-American. It's the most American thing there is. A single clap echoed from the back row. Then, a few more. Not a standing ovation, just a quiet acknowledgement that they heard her, that they felt her. That was all she ever wanted. The fallout from Jasmine Crockett's question dominated headlines for nearly 2 weeks. But when the dust began to settle, what remained wasn't scandal. It was curiosity. People were asking deeper questions now, not just about Melania's immigration path, but about the entire system. Why are some people forgiven for errors while others are punished for the same? Why does discretion benefit the powerful but destroy the vulnerable? Why do so many lawmakers dodge these conversations until someone like Jasmine forces them onto the table? That shift toward inquiry was what rattled the establishment the most. And Jasmine? She didn't feed the media's hunger for drama. She refused to engage in a back and forth with Trump. In one interview, when pressed on his endless posts, she simply said, "He's loud. But volume doesn't equal truth." Behind closed doors, she stayed focused on the amendment, her quiet piece of legislation calling for transparency from high-profile immigration applicants. It wasn't flashy, but it was gaining bipartisan interest, quietly. Even staffers who had once dismissed her were now requesting copies of her notes. In Philadelphia, a small but influential advocacy group called Project Waypoint launched a campaign titled "Held Same Standard," directly inspired by Jasmine's viral moment. Their mission: demand equal enforcement of immigration laws, regardless of wealth, notoriety, or political clout. Jasmine didn't take credit, she didn't post about it, but her team made a donation, the maximum allowed, because the girl who once defended teenagers in courtrooms with flickering lights and overworked air conditioners, she was now shaping national reform. And she had done something few in Congress ever do. She told the truth, clearly, and stood by it, even when it burned. Especially when it burned. As she left that school gym in Baltimore, one student followed her to the parking lot. He looked maybe 16, hoodie pulled over his head, notebook in hand. He didn't say much, just handed her a folded piece of paper and walked away. She opened it later in the car. Written in messy, uneven handwriting, "I used to think I had to stay quiet. Thanks for showing me I don't." She didn't cry. She smiled. That slow, quiet kind of smile that says more than a microphone ever could. Because that was always the point. Not going viral. Not proving someone wrong. The point was the truth, saying it when it mattered, and showing others they could too. And that truth, delivered without shouting, without spin, had done something remarkable. It moved people. Not just politically, but personally. Jasmine Crockett hadn't thrown punches. She hadn't branded herself a crusader. She had simply held up a mirror and asked the country to look at what it had chosen not to see. And people saw. In homes, classrooms, barbershops, churches, on social media, news panels, and street corners. They saw what selective silence had allowed, what unspoken rules had cost, what could change if just one voice refused to let the script play out like it always had. She didn't deliver a revolution. She delivered a reckoning, and in that reckoning, something powerful took root. The phrase, "same rules, same country," started showing up on more than just shirts. It became a chant at immigration rallies, a line quoted in essays, a question asked in classrooms, bookmark. Even members of Congress, some of whom had once rolled their eyes at Jasmine, began to listen more closely when she spoke, not out of fear, but out of recognition. Respect, because she had shown that strength wasn't about shouting louder, it was about standing firmer, and telling the truth even when the world wasn't ready to hear it. As the weeks rolled on, other stories took over the news cycle, other controversies, other distractions. But for those who had watched her, really watched her, something stuck. Not the headlines, not the outrage, but the moment. That quiet, calm question that asked, if we're really one nation under the law, why does fairness still feel optional? And for some, that was the first time they'd ever paused to wonder. In the end, Jasmine didn't need to go viral. She didn't need to trend, she just needed to speak, and show others that they could too. So if this story made you pause, even for a second, if it stirred something in you, if it made you rethink what fairness looks like or who's allowed to ask questions, then don't just scroll, subscribe, share, start the conversation, because silence might keep you safe for now. But truth has a way of starting things that matter, things that last.